About 4 months ago now, we released a video on our impressions of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It remains our most highly engaged video so far, and I learned a lot about the game from your kind and encouraging comments. While I had intended on creating this video way earlier, the true BBEG of TTRPGs reared its ugly head. Scheduling. Well, better late than never, I suppose. Hi, I'm John from Incendium RPGs, and today we're talking about my limited experience playtesting Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Let's get into it. Alright, time for the subscriber roll-off. I'm going to roll a persuasion check contested by your will save. If my score meets or beats yours, I have successfully persuaded you to join this channel and click the notification bell. If my score beats you by 10 or more, that's a critical success. Definitely leave a comment down below in the video. Alright, we ready? Here we go! That is an 18. If you got lower than an 18, welcome to the channel. If you got an 8 or lower, make sure to leave us a comment below. So Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I want to kick off this video by reiterating that one of my immediate insights of the game had nothing to do with the system itself, but rather the community. I've found with my limited interactions with the Pathfinder community that all of you are welcoming, passionate, and supportive. And I've got to admit, when I was writing that first impressions script, I kind of felt like the dumb kid asking a lot of obvious questions. So it was nice to see a lot of thoughtful, well-written responses. Like I had mentioned in my impressions video, there were some aspects of the system I was concerned about, and what your explanations helped do was help me keep a particular eye out so that ideally the system could run smoother. A really good example of this was the archetype system. In my initial video, I said something about how I preferred multiclassing over archetypes, and one of the reasons for that is I guess some of the coolest archetypes aren't even in the core rulebook, so it's kind of like judging 5th edition's class design without accounting for Xanathar's or Tasha's. So, although my impression hasn't really changed that much, again, I haven't really run higher levels in the system and played enough to make a judgment about it. Another thing was my commentary on the math of Pathfinder, how adding your level to your proficiency bonus created a different kind of scaling than I was used to. Turns out that's just a style thing based on the system. In the playtest, the math ended up being very similar to my experience with 5th edition at a similar level. But again, I can't really make a judgment on it because I didn't playtest this at higher levels. What I can make a judgment on is the whole illusion of choice thing, which I can definitively say is definitely not an issue with Pathfinder's system. Now again, there may be wider power gaps than I experienced. One of 5th edition's biggest issues is how imbalanced the game can be based on certain subclass options. Twilight and Peace Domain Cleric are so ridiculously powerful that they decrease the viability of a lot of other builds. But in terms of the action economy and the illusion of choice, yeah, that definitely was an exaggerated concern. And one other huge benefit to the system that I can really credit it for is that all of the rules are online for free. D&D has some online free resources. In fact, the whole OGL debacle ended with SRD 5.1 being released into Creative Commons. But when I say all of the content, I mean all of the archetypes, all of the spells, all of the ancestries and feats. Every player option you can imagine is available online on the Archives of Nethys, from what I've seen. To me, that's an incredibly powerful statement of Paizo's values, and is just another reason why I can understand why Pathfinder has such ardent supporters. Alright, so now, let's get on to my actual playtesting experience. My intended audience for this video is for players of 5th edition that are Pathfinder curious, who may be a little intimidated by the sheer weight of this core rulebook, and may be nervous because they've heard claims that this game is a little crunchier and a little overwhelming. And of course, if you are a Pathfinder player, please let me know in the comments if I get anything wrong, and I may even be asking for your help here in a sec. But overall, from playtesting Pathfinder, my overall goal was to find answers for 4 big questions. Number 1, and probably most importantly, how will my players who love the way that I run 5th edition respond to this system? How meaningful will their choices be? Again, to address that whole illusion of choice concern. Will the math distract from the story? From my circle of TTRPG enjoyers, one of the things that I had heard from some friends that had tried Pathfinder is that the math is really crunchy and it overall distracts from the role-playing. And then 4, because they're both D20 systems, and Pathfinder has a reputation for just being a more involved version of D&D, would my players be interested in converting from 5th edition to this system? Now, overall, I ran 2 short playtests. Both of them were from the beginner box, which was overwhelmingly recommended to me by Pathfinder players. I had time to run the first 3 encounters, which, spoiler alert, were the giant rat fight in the basement, the giant spider fight, and a fight against a zombie and 4 skeletons. The first playtest I ran was for 4 of my current D&D players. We created characters using the rules only from the core rulebook, and I made sure to pick a variety of players. Some were more interested in mechanics than others. Some of them were more intrigued by the various options than others. That way, again, to answer the question of would we be willing to convert, I'd get a sense of both the players that were excited about the system and the players that were coming in a little more neutral. I will say, I also afterward ran a playtest by myself. All around me are familiar faces. Where I basically just GM'd the 4 pre-generated characters that come with the beginner box through those same first 3 encounters. I also ran this game digitally. Partially that again had to do with a scheduling thing. For my group, we find it much easier to schedule a virtual game where we don't have to meet up at a certain place or spend time traveling to an agreed upon location. And I was GMing using the PDFs that I purchased through the Humble Bundle sale that was going on a few months ago. And so, my first playtest with Pathfinder 2nd edition was a disaster. Alright, there was a lot that went wrong. And some of it honestly had nothing to do with the system. I've been playing virtually since 2020. This is the first time I've had so many technological disruptions to a game I've run. One player had a last-minute laptop switch, so we had to wait for Discord to get downloaded and booted up. Another player's computer crashed mid-combat. Those technical issues made things difficult enough. Second, because my players created their own characters, I ended up having 3 casters and 1 martial character at the table. And again, because of my ignorance of the system, I didn't realize how limiting that would be in terms of getting helpful feedback about the strengths and weaknesses of the 3-action economy. As you Pathfinder people know, rather than 5th edition's move, action, bonus action economy, Pathfinder 2nd edition on every turn, a creature just gets 3 actions. And those actions can be simple like move, attack, move again. Every character can take a 5-foot step, which is basically a disengage. But casting a spell requires 2 actions. So one player has said to me over and over again, I just don't get the whole deal with this 3-action economy. It feels just like 5th edition. Which I understand from their perspective, because in 5th edition, as a spellcaster, you're used to just move, maybe, and use your action to cast a spell. And boy, if you try a bonus action spell, do the rules get convoluted. So a lot of times you don't even worry about the bonus action spell, you just cast your one big spell a turn. That's a valid perspective if you're just comparing what did the systems feel like. Now again, because we had created our own characters, one player was just getting sheerly overwhelmed by the amount of boxes on the character sheet. Rather than having one little bubble for your proficiency, there are 4 because there are proficiency levels in this system. And it took me a few times explaining the T means trained, the E means expert. Now, you can of course just be like, well, they just need to get good. But again, part of my evaluation of the system isn't just how well it's theoretically designed, it's how well the system fits my particular players. And if my players feel overwhelmed, that's not a commentary on the system if it's good or bad. For my table, it just might not be a good fit. Definitely the worst part of the playtest was the second encounter against the giant spider. Remember, these are players I've been playing D&D with for like 7 years now. As soon as they saw the webs on the map, they did not want to cross. There's this whole design chunk of that encounter where you may be able to avoid the giant spider depending on some acrobatics checks you do to try to like balance across the webs. From the way I interpreted it, the webs were like everywhere in the cavern. So the combat started when one of the players decided to use one of their torches to start burning away the webs. Now as a GM, I got a really good look of how the 3 action economy works for the monsters. So I had the giant spider like do its spider thing and scuttle out and use its range attack to try to like web somebody and then scuttle back. Now, if this were a 5th edition game, and say the players were nervous about crossing the webs, what I would advise them to do is to ready an action. So if they're like a wizard, they would ready Firebolt, so that when the spider comes out again, their reaction could shoot the fireball at the spider. With Pathfinder 2nd edition though, the ready action requires 2 actions, and you can only ready something that costs 1 action. So the complication came when the spellcasters, most of their stuff cost 2 actions, so they couldn't ready any of their cantrips to attack the spider when it came out. And this is where I got really stuck. I was trying to flip through the book and just find something that they could do for their actions. Now later I found out there was a delay turn option where you can move where you are in the initiative order. And maybe that could have changed up the order of combat so that the spider would be in sight. But honestly, I had no idea what to do. And 3 actions sounds really nice until there's like nothing you can do with them. So for those of you who may be Pathfinder players watching this video, how would you have solved that? Is there some action option outside of the basic actions that I missed? Is there maybe a variant rule in the Game Master's Guide that I just didn't know about? I'm really curious about this because this is the one part of the playtest where I really had no idea how to help my players feel like they were still playing without just running straight into the webs and getting stuck fighting the spider. In fact, I was so just disappointed at that point that I just kind of rushed to the 3rd combat and called it a night after that. After debriefing with my playtesters, giant spider fight aside, I got a really clear answer for my 4th question there. Would we be converting to Pathfinder? They did not like it. They didn't like how long character building took. They didn't like tracking all of the little boxes on the character sheet. One player said that they would be really intrigued to play a long-term game, like maybe 10 sessions to get a good feel for it. But because they knew this was like a playtest one-shot, they felt that they took a disproportionate amount of time creating their character than getting to actually use all the things. So again, this speaks to a certain style of play. Our group doesn't really have time to run something way longer. I mean, look, it took us 4 months just to schedule a one-shot. And we're having so much fun with 5th edition, it just doesn't make sense to just stop. Now, of course, the silver lining to this whole thing is it affirmed how much my players love the 5th edition game we're playing. They just kept saying how much fun they usually have with their regular game. That although I was a new GM, the amount of things to keep track of in this system just felt unnecessary because it felt like we had struck the perfect balance. And remember, when I'm talking about my 5th edition game, I'm not playing rules as written. So it is a bit of an unfair comparison, because for my 5th edition game, there are variant and homebrew rules, there are crafting systems, there's custom actions that the players can take. It's like comparing a tuned racing car to a stock version of a competitor. I don't know Pathfinder well enough to be able to homebrew and tune it to my players' needs. So again, it's a really unfair comparison to Pathfinder as a system, but it's where my table finds itself now. Now, also remember, there was a second playtest that I did with myself. And man, was this one a blast! Oh, I had such fun with the 3-action economy. I had so much fun with these pre-generated characters. And what I had realized is that I had completely missed these PDFs. Apparently, I was not as thorough as I thought I was. But in my solo playtest, I got to see so many things. How the dying mechanics worked. I got to really see a lot of instances of critical success and critical failure. If I was a little more experienced in the system as the GM, and to be honest, if my players had done a lot more homework, I can see why this would be a robust and engaging system that would garner such a passionate fan base. On the subject of meaningful decision making, and does the math distract from the role playing? Again, having lots of different conversations with people I know, I find this comes down to a personality thing. There are some individuals I've talked to that swear by the fact that more mechanics makes it harder to roleplay. That the more things there are to keep track of, the more it distracts them from being able to feel creative or to play out the narrative moments that they want. And for some of my players at my D&D table, this is absolutely the case. At the same playtest table though, some players find themselves inspired by robust mechanics. They like the banks to the river that it creates, and how like a little option gets them to think about things that they normally wouldn't had that not been an explicit option. I just find that D&D tends to have a more broad audience. It attracts more people, but there's not the same kind of concentrated passion that you get for something that, for lack of a better term, kind of is more of a niche experience. I had a lot of fun with Pathfinder, but I could also see how it really helps deliver a slightly more specific experience than 5th edition does. I think for this first playtest, as a GM, I bit off a little more than I could chew. The pre-generated character sheets in the beginner's box have a page dedicated to options and tactical guidance. So if you're thinking about running the beginner box, learn from my mistakes. Even if you have experienced players, don't have them create their own characters first. Start with the pre-generated characters from the beginner's box. This is definitely a game where I think you kind of have to learn the system first before you unlock all of the options of character creation. If they feel comfortable with the combat system, now that's when I think adding on the layer of character creation can be interesting. So to go back to my 4 questions, what are my answers for the other ones? I took a survey from my playtesters. Their answers were, I felt overwhelmed, meh, I'm intrigued, but I'd need to play more to be convinced. Were my players' choices meaningful? Yes. There was not some magical optimal gameplay loop that we experienced. There were plenty of times where either the best option was to move and attack and move again, or even for the spellcasters. You know, do I move and cast a spell, or do I cast a spell with 2 actions and use shield as 1 action? Did the math distract from the story? For the most part, with the players that I played with, yes. Again, this comes down to a personality thing. I think that really to get the most out of Pathfinder, there's a higher bar for how much homework your players need to be willing to do in order to get the most out of the experience. I think if they just show up and ask the DM recommendations, I think it can be really overwhelming. So especially if you're a new GM, you have to be clear with your players up front that this will not work right if you are not doing your homework. So if you're a D&D DM looking to dip your toes into Pathfinder, please do not let my failure of a playtest dissuade you from trying it yourself. To quote the memes nowadays, it was honestly just a skill issue. But then again, you kinda need more skill to have the most amount of fun that Pathfinder has to offer. At least, that was my experience. So now I want to hear what all of you have to say. Was my analysis on the mark, or were there major things that I missed? And for you Pathfinder players that may have come across this video, what would you have done during that spider fight? Was there an action option I missed, or some other thing my casters could have done? Or, unlike 5th edition, do they really need to have weapons on hand for situations like that? Let me know in the comments down below, and have an awesome day, everybody. Bye-bye now.